bonsai's like basket weaving into that?
Yeah, there's a little bit of that. There's an element to that.
All right, so I'm here today with Bjorn, and I'm going to ask him a few questions, and we're going to see what kind of answers he's got.
If I have any.
So how did you get into bonsai?
So when I was 8 years old, I started doing karate as a hobby. And then I got interested in kind of Japanese architecture and art and culture. And when I was 12, I saw the Karate Kid movies.
Oh, okay.
And that was my first introduction to bonsai. So I got my first tree for my 13th birthday. It was a little Japanese garden juniper from Home Depot.
Oh, really?
With the rocks glued on the top and the little Mr. Miyagi man, the mud man underneath.
Yeah, the mud man.
Yeah,
so that's kind of how you got started?
Yeah, that's how I got started.
So from there, like how did it kind of ended up going to Japan? How did you end up going to Japan?
Yeah, so there's...
Because I was 13 years old. When did you go to Japan?
The first time I went, I was 16 actually. So I went over for 2 weeks in July and stayed with the host family for a couple of nights. And they found out that I was interested in bonsai, so they got on the internet, started searching around, and the only nurseries that had websites at that time were Fujikawa-san's nursery in Osaka, and a place called eisei-en, which is right in the same general area.
Yeah.
So they took me to both of those nurseries. I got to meet Mr. Fujikawa, and while I was there, he gave me his business card and said, as a joke, if you ever want to come back and live in Japan long term, give me a call. I'll let you be an apprentice here.
Well, you ended up, so after 16, you got this business card, right? So how did you end up actually making the decision to go back?
So for my undergrad degree, I went to University of Tennessee, and I knew that I wanted to go to Japan at least to try to work at some point, not necessarily to do bonsai. Like if I could do bonsai as a career and do an apprenticeship, that would be great. Yeah. So it's kind of in the back of my mind. Yeah. But I knew that that probably wasn't likely, so I thought, okay, I want to study Japanese at university with the intention of trying to get a job in Japan in the future. But when I went back to the States my senior year to finish my degree, I thought, okay, I want to go back to Japan and do this apprenticeship. I think I can do it. Yeah. So I started writing Fujikawa-san from the States.
So when you were thinking about doing, were you thinking with the intention of making bonsai your career, or was it really just you were like, I am going to try this out and we'll see, I have an interest in it?
Yeah, in the back of my head, I wanted to do it as a career choice, but at the time, my folks were not super supportive of me doing an apprenticeship.
I was going to ask you that.
Which, at the time, I was like, well, forget you guys, I'm going to do what I want to do kind of thing. But looking back on it, I understand why they felt that way. Yeah. So, if I had a kid and they finished university and they wanted to go study like basket weaving in Tibet or something, I'd be like, yeah, I don't think so.
So bonsai's like basket weaving in Tibet?
Yeah, there's a little bit of that. There's an element to that. So I totally understand the reasoning behind not being fully supportive. Yeah. But I went over, started the apprenticeship, and it really started out with a 3-month trial period, and then launched that into what eventually became a 6-year apprenticeship. Yeah. And then 3 additional years working there. So I stayed for 9 years total.
Like, what would you kind of describe that as? 6 years apprenticeship?
Well, like a mental and physical marathon. During the summer, I would actually get at least a day off a month, if not a couple of days off a month. Okay. Whereas from about October through March, that was our busy season. Yeah. Because the exhibitions, they start in November for the Taikon 10.
Oh, okay.
So in October, about a month before, we really start picking up, preparing the trees for the show, preparing trees for the sales area. And that continues all the way through the Kokufu in February, and then right after the Kokufu, we have the repotting season.
Yeah, did you enjoy it? Did you enjoy the 7 days a week? And
I mean, at first it's like you have kind of a romanticized vision of what the apprenticeship is going to be like. So it's going to be 7 days a week. It's going to be hard. It's going to be nonstop. Yeah. But then sort of the cultural elements, at least for me, they started wearing on me the second year. Into the apprenticeship. Yeah. Some of the smaller things that you didn't really notice before. There's so many people in Japan. Yeah. You really don't have much privacy. Everybody kind of keeps to themselves, even when you're riding on the train, but you're still jammed in like a sardine. There are people everywhere. The bureaucratic side of things, they like to follow a lot of rules. Societal rules in Japan, which can get, kind of intense at times and overbearing. Yeah. So that second year, that started to wear on me, and I think that happens actually for most people who do an apprenticeship.
Oh, it starts the cultural.
Yeah, those things start to come out, and really I think part of it is most people, after they do the first year, they go home for a week or two to visit family. Yeah. And then all the things that they weren't really thinking about, kind of pushed aside. Oh, they start thinking about that. It kind of brings it back. They get homesick maybe a little bit, and they notice the cultural differences more when they come back the second year. Yeah. And then usually by the end of the second year, most people end up quitting their apprenticeship. 9 times out of 10, people quit after about 2 years. So, yeah.
And then you mixing in with everybody is just seamless, right? You go in there, you're 6'5"?
Yeah, 6'5".
Amongst in Japan, that must have been just like.
Yeah, I stuck out like a sore thumb.
So how was that?
Yeah, I don't know. It was there was a novelty factor being a foreigner doing an apprenticeship, particularly down in Osaka, because most of the big nurseries are up in Saitama, like north of Tokyo. You know, the Omiya Bonsai Village, you know, Mr. Kobayashi's nursery is in Tokyo. So there's a lot of, the major nurseries are up in that area.
Yeah.
So down in Osaka, at the time, I was the only Caucasian, you know, foreign apprentice in that area. So there was a novelty factor there. So a lot of the clients from other nurseries and even Fujikawa-san's regular customers, they would bring trees in just for me to style and cool. So I got to work on a lot of stuff that you know, I probably wouldn't have otherwise gotten to work on.
Yeah.
You know, maybe if I'd been just like a Japanese, you know, native Japanese apprentice coming into that situation.
Yeah.
But that novelty, you know, wears off after a couple of years. You know.
After a couple of years.
Yeah, a year and a half, 2 years, somewhere around there.
I mean, I assume that there was a certain point when people started realizing the skill that you had, right? I assume that when you're apprenticing, they're like, okay, you know, this guy's actually got some talent. You know, was there kind of a point during that apprenticeship where that kind of happened?
I got kind of lucky in my apprenticeship. I was Fujikawa-san's first apprentice ever.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there was no other Japanese apprentices. Nobody else had come in before me.
Yeah.
He had studied at Saburo Kato's nursery up in Tokyo, Eisei-en, back in the late 80s, early 90s.
Okay.
But since then, he had no apprentices himself. So I got kind of lucky because, you know, normally when you come into apprenticeship, you have your senpai, you know, the people above you in rank, and they're the ones who are working on the high-end trees, and you know, you usually have, you know, 2, 3, 4 of those guys above you, and you kind of work up to that. But for me, there was so much work to do when I came in that I got to get my hands on, you know, really good material almost right from the start.
And so during that apprenticeship, that's when you did your first series of videos, Art of Bonsai, right?
Yeah, Bonsai Art of Japan.
The Bonsai Art of Japan. I'm sorry, Bonsai Art of Japan. And what kind of possessed you to do that? Because you know, back YouTube was still kind of, I think, kind of young.
It was young, yeah, because that would have been. I started the channel in 2011, so it was a ways into YouTube, but there weren't really many bonsai videos at that point.
Yeah, probably not many.
Yeah,
at all.
so I saw, you know, Lindsay Farr's World of Bonsai. Yeah, he'd go to Japan and he'd go from nursery to nursery and, you know, kind of show the behind the scenes aspect of it. So I thought, oh, you know, this is kind of interesting. I want to try making some videos. So I wanted to actually use his model. And go to a couple different nurseries, a few different nurseries, and film. So I asked Fujikawa-san if that was okay, and he said absolutely not. He said, if you're going to film, you film only at the nursery here, only at Kokaen. Okay. So I thought, okay, let's see how we can format this to make it work. So it ended up going from a format like that, you know, showing other nurseries, to more of showing some of the techniques and some of the behind-the-scenes stuff that we were doing at the nursery.
I think you know, a lot of you know, the people that go on my site, you know, are beginners. So you know, if you were to give some advice to beginners, what's some advice that you'd give to some beginners? Yeah,
probably the biggest thing is don't overbuy to start with. Not necessarily in buying, you know, expensive material, but don't buy too many trees. You know, everybody wants to experiment and kind of learn, you know, what they like and what they don't like. Like I want to work with all sorts of different species. I want to see which species I like, which sizes I like. That's great, but it's better to sort of take your time through that process. You know, and you've got a good resource with your videos online. There's lots of other videos available online to kind of help you through that process of how to select a good tree. And then, you know, of course, you sell trees as well. And like you said, you're geared towards the beginner, so you have material for those folks. But my recommendation is don't buy 100 trees to start with. Buy like, you know, 10 or 15, maybe one of each of a handful of species, and try it out. But don't buy like 20 of this, and 20 of that, and 50 of this.
So speaking of that, like, what were the trees that you gravitated toward?
When I started out, I think, you know, most people start with like a procumbens juniper. That seems to be kind of at least on the East Coast in the more temperate climates. So I started out with those, and then I killed that tree, the original tree I had.
I think everybody kills their first tree.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was dead when I got it, actually, it had the rock scoot on the top.
The rock scoot on top.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure the foliage was spray painted green. So, but from there, I moved into deciduous trees pretty quickly. So Japanese maples, that was probably my favorite species to work with early on. Well, most of the work that people see me do online is coniferous work.
Right.
Mainly actually because it's easy to access that material. You can collect stuff out of the mountains that's already 200, 300, 400 years old, and to take it from the mountains to an exhibition, you can do that in 3 or 4 years. It's a very quick turnaround. And you know, if you're making a video, it's almost instantaneous in the video. Taking a raw piece of material and at least setting the structure. So it makes it easy to show that online.
Versus deciduous trees.
Exactly, But deciduous material, I actually like working with that more than coniferous material. The problem is you can't really make it doesn't translate well to the internet.
Yeah,
you know,
you can't demonstrate it.
Yeah, exactly. Because anytime you get a piece of, if it's raw material, the first styling is let's cut everything off and start over again.
It's not too entertaining.
It's not that entertaining, but I like that process of, you know, thinking 10, 15, 20, 30 years down the line.
Oh, I mean, you've been traveling to a lot of shows and throughout the country. I mean, throughout the world, actually, to different countries. What sort of trends do you see in bonsai right now?
Yeah, there's a general. Well, it depends on where I go. Mm-hmm. In Europe, there's kind of a general trend towards trying to match and maybe exceed the level of quality that you see in Japan. In the States, there's some of that as well, and then there's also this kind of parallel push for kind of creating a new stylistic approach to some degree here, which I'm not quite sure
and what
I totally understand.
Could you describe that one?
I don't, well, see, I don't know what that is yet. I just hear a lot of people mentioning like, oh, American bonsai, American bonsai. It's the only place I go in the world where people say the country name and bonsai. Like when I go to Europe, nobody says I want to make Polish bonsai.
You know, I'll be honest, that confuses me as well. I'm like, how is it American bonsai? What is the definition of American bonsai?
Exactly. I'm curious. I'm not opposed to it. I'm just curious to see where it goes, because, you know, bonsai is kind of, to me, it's more of an emergent art. So, you know, like I said, with the conifers, you can take a tree from the mountains and get it to a show in 3, 4, 5 years if you know what you're doing. But the continual development of that tree over time, through that on the back end is where sort of the art and the aesthetic emerges. So that's, you know, 10, 15, 20 years down the line. And it's more obvious when you're talking about deciduous material. You know, just so, for example, if you identify, okay, I value this thing in design. Like, for example, I value, you know, soft ramification with my deciduous trees. There's only a certain number of stimuli you can apply to a tree, horticultural practices you can apply to a tree to get that end goal, right? And that just takes year after year after year of applying that technique.
Right.
And 20 years down the line, you have a beautifully ramified tree.
Right.
So it emerges on the back end. And then, of course, there are cultural influences that kind of influence that along the way. But here it seems like the opposite effect. People want to impose themselves first. Right, it's a very American thing to do, though, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just it's a cultural thing. Everybody's very individualistic here, which is great. So I'm curious to see how that manifests itself
in the long term,
15, 20 years down the line.
Random question: if you know, and I was asked to ask you this question,
for a friend?
if you were to be asking for a friend, if you were to be any type of species of tree, what tree species would you be?
What tree species would I be? I don't know. Probably I really like Japanese flowering apricots.
Oh, okay.
You know, they've got.
That's not the answer I was expecting.
Yeah,
okay.
I like things with contrast.
Okay.
You know, I'm in my head anyway. I'm a pretty contrasted individual. So I seem very calm. I am pretty calm. But I listen to death metal. Like those are my jams. Like,
okay, cool.
So you look at like a flowering apricot, you get the gnarly bark and the gnarly deadwood. You've got these little dainty flowers that come out, you know, in late winter, early spring. So I like contrasted things.
I've noticed that since you've come back to the States, you started your own garden, and I believe it's called eisei-en.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So my wife and I moved back just a little over a year ago and settled in Nashville, Tennessee. We're actually on the eastern side of Nashville in a place called Mount Juliet. We set up our nursery eisei-en, which translates to evergreen garden. It actually has multiple meanings. So my wife was the one who came up with the name. She's Chinese, so she understands the nuances of the kanji that I don't. So she came up with this name. It translates to evergreen garden, which works well for a nursery. But it also translates to forever young. With the idea of kind of always having an open mind to trying new things, learning new things.
And you just had a grand opening.
Yeah.
I think it was at the beginning of
September.
September.
Yeah, September 1st and 2nd.
So now it's is open to the public, or at this point?
No, at this point I still travel about 250 days out of the year. For right now, we're open by appointment only.
Yeah.
So if you want to come visit the nursery, just send me an email through my website, and then we set up a time for you to come out and visit.
And the website is?
It's either my name or eisei-en.com. So bjornbjorholm.com or eisei-en.com.
Okay.
Either one of those.
Today is Halloween.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite costume?
Costume.
You just told me like death metal, so we'll see what kind of answer you give me on this one.
The last time I dressed up for Halloween was when I was in Japan for my junior year of university doing the study abroad.
Okay.
Which was 12 years ago. Yeah. That was the last time I dressed up.
That was the last time you dressed up?
Yeah. My buddies and I had a friend from Ireland and a friend from Utah.
Yeah.
Who was there. They were both there for the study abroad program. We decided to go down to a women's clothing store and buy a bunch of women's clothes like skirts and tube tops and high heels, and we went out on the town. Right. There's probably some pictures floating around on Facebook. I tried to untag myself from all of them, but I'm sure they're still out there in the ether somewhere.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell, my viewers?
Absorb as much information as you can going forward. There's a lot of really good information out there online, and a lot of bad information online as well. But there's enough good information that it's starting to swamp out the bad information. Just be discerning in what you listen to and what you follow. But Eastern Leaf's a great one. If you want to check out my YouTube as well, it's a good place to start. But
definitely.
Just absorb as much information as you can, and then practice. So just experiment with techniques that you hear online. Don't take everything as a one-all answer for everything.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. All right, thanks, Bjorn.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, my pleasure.